I was peeling apples in my kitchen when my phone vibrated. Nothing about that moment felt important. The radio was playing softly. Sunlight was coming through the window. It was just an ordinary afternoon. Then I read the message. Don't come to my wedding. No explanation, no apology, just two sentences that quietly erased me from my own son's life. And in that moment, I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I sat down and realized something that would change everything. Because when someone tells you your presence is unwanted, you finally understand what love has become. I was standing in my kitchen that afternoon, peeling apples slowly, carefully, the way I always had. My hands knew the motion by heart. The radio played an old song I barely noticed anymore, and sunlight spilled through the window, warming the floor near my feet. It was one of those quiet, ordinary moments that never announce themselves as important. My name is Margaret Hale. I was 68 that year, retired, living alone in the same small house where I had raised my children. And in that moment, I remember feeling something close to peace. I was thinking about my son, Daniel. Daniel was finally settling into his life. He was getting married, starting a family, building something of his own. I had dreamed of that future for him long before he could even spell his own name, back when he was just a barefoot boy running through the grass, laughing without fear. My phone vibrated on the kitchen table. I smiled without thinking. Mothers never outgrow that habit. No matter how old your child gets, your heart still reacts first. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up the phone. The message was short, cold, sharp. Don't come to the wedding. My wife is uncomfortable. For a moment, my mind refused to accept the words. I read them again, slower this time, out loud, as if my voice might soften them, as if saying them differently could change what they meant. Don't come. Those two words landed heavier than any insult, heavier than shouting, heavier than blame. They carried years with them. First steps, scraped knees, school plays I never missed, late-night talks when he was afraid of the dark, quiet prayers I whispered over his sleeping face when I thought no one could hear. My legs suddenly felt unsure. I sat down at the small kitchen table, the chair scraping softly against the floor. The knife slipped from my fingers and tapped against the plate. I didn't even flinch. The pie was forgotten. The sunlight faded. The radio kept humming, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I waited. I waited for another message to follow, an explanation, an apology, a correction, a joke that went too far. Nothing came. The screen went dark in my hand. For months I had been involved in every detail of that wedding. I helped choose decorations. I sent money when they said they were short. I offered to host relatives who would travel from far away. I imagined myself sitting quietly in the back row, holding a tissue, watching my son become a husband. Now, I wasn't even allowed in the room. I stood up slowly and walked to my bedroom. I opened the closet. Hanging there was the simple blue dress I had bought just for that day. I touched the fabric gently. I remembered standing in the store, smiling at my reflection, thinking, I want to look nice when I see my son get married. With trembling hands, I took the dress down, folded it carefully, and placed it back on the shelf. That small movement broke something inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. I didn't scream. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't beg to be included. I sat on the edge of my bed and let the truth settle where excuses used to live. I had been removed from a moment every mother dreams of. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every sacrifice, every time I had chosen his needs over my own. I wondered when love had become conditional, when motherhood started feeling like standing outside a locked door. And in that silence, something new began to rise inside me. Not anger, not hatred, clarity. Because when someone tells you your presence is unwanted, you finally understand where you stand. And that understanding changes everything. The morning after the message, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I wanted to, but because sleep refused to stay with me. The house was silent in a way that made every thought louder. Pale light slipped through the curtains, resting gently on the wall across from my bed. I lay there for a long moment, staring at it, feeling yesterday still pressing on my chest like a weight I hadn't yet learned how to carry. My first instinct was to reach for my phone. That habit was automatic, trained by years of hope. I checked the screen. Nothing. No apology, no explanation, no, "Mom, I didn't mean it like that." Just silence. I got out of bed and made myself tea. The kettle whistled, sharp and impatient, then fell quiet. I sat at the small table by the window, holding the warm cup between my hands. The heat reached my fingers, but it didn't reach my heart. That was when a thought, one I had avoided for years, finally settled. For a long time, I had been supporting Daniel financially, even after retirement, every month without fail. At first, it made sense. Young families struggle. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself this was what good mothers do. They give without counting. But somewhere along the way, my help stopped being appreciated and started being expected. I stared at the steam rising from my tea and realized something painful. My presence could be dismissed, but my money couldn't. That understanding hurt more than the message itself. I put on my coat and stepped outside. The air was cool, the street was quiet. Each step toward the bank felt heavier than the last, like I was walking against my own instincts. Love had trained me to sacrifice, to stay quiet, to endure. Turning away from that felt unnatural, almost wrong. But I kept walking. At the bank, I sat across from a young clerk who couldn't have been older than Daniel. She smiled politely and asked how she could help. "I need to cancel my automatic transfers," I said. My voice shook slightly, but I didn't stop. She clicked on her computer, nodding. I watched her screen reflect in her glasses as she asked for confirmation. I also closed the savings account I had created for Daniel and his future home, the one I had built slowly, quietly, by skipping small comforts, by telling myself I didn't need much. When she handed me the receipt, my hands trembled, not because of the money, because I knew this decision would change everything. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't send a message. I went home, cooked lunch for myself, and waited. That evening passed quietly. So did the next morning. Then on the second afternoon, my phone rang.
I recognized the number instantly. My heart betrayed me, jumping with foolish hope. "Mom," Daniel said carefully, "the payment didn't go through. Is something wrong with your account?" I closed my eyes. "No," I said softly. "There's nothing wrong. I just decided to stop." There was silence. "You stopped?" he repeated, confused. "But we need that money right now." Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Did I hurt you?" Only need. That was the moment the truth fully revealed itself. "My help has always come from love," I replied calmly. "But now I need to take care of myself." He sighed, irritated, not concerned. The call ended quickly. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the wall. It hurt more than I expected. But beneath the pain, something unfamiliar appeared. Relief. For the first time in years, I had drawn a line. Not in anger, not in revenge, in self-respect. The knock came early evening, not loud, not urgent, just firm. I already knew who it would be. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there with Emily, his fiancée. She stayed slightly behind him, holding her purse tightly, avoiding my eyes. Inside, they sat on the couch. I made tea, not for politeness, but to steady myself. Emily spoke first. Wedding stress, misunderstandings, high emotions. Her words sounded practiced. Daniel nodded beside her. Money came up quickly. Feelings did not. When they finally stopped talking, they looked at me, waiting. "You didn't come here to talk about feelings. You came because the money stopped." Daniel opened his mouth to argue. I raised my hand. "I respected your decision about the wedding. I stayed quiet. But respect goes both ways." Emily finally looked at me, surprised. "If I'm not welcome as a mother," I said, my voice steady, "I cannot continue as a bank." The room felt heavy. Daniel called me sensitive, said I should understand. I looked at him, not as my little boy, but as a grown man who had forgotten where he came from. "I do understand," I replied. "I understand that I need boundaries." They left without shouting. When the door closed, I leaned against it and closed my eyes. My heart hurt, but for the first time in my life, I felt strong, because dignity, once chosen, cannot be taken away. The day of the wedding arrived without ceremony in my house. No ringing phones, no rushed footsteps, no music floating through the rooms, just morning light and the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. I woke up early, as I always did, but something was different. There was no tightness in my chest, no knot of anticipation. Instead, there was a strange calm, the kind that settles in once you stop fighting a truth you can't change. I made myself breakfast. Toast, tea, simple things. I carried my cup outside to the small garden behind the house. The air was cool, fresh. The sky was clear. Somewhere far away, the wedding was happening. Dresses, flowers, photographs, smiles carefully arranged for cameras. But it felt distant, like a story that once belonged to me and no longer did. Instead of sitting with sadness, I picked up my gardening tools. I knelt in the soil where old flowers had withered and planted new ones. My hands moved slowly, carefully pressing the earth around fragile roots. As I worked, something became clear. This is what rebuilding looks like. Not loud, not dramatic, slow, intentional, quiet. That afternoon, I put on a simple dress. Not the blue one meant for the wedding. That dress stayed unfolded. untouched. I chose comfort instead. I walked to the community center. It was a small gathering, nothing special, but people greeted me warmly. They asked how I was, and when I spoke, they listened. I realized how long it had been since I felt seen. Weeks passed. The phone rang less often. The requests for money stopped completely. Messages, when they came, were short, polite, careful, and with every quiet day, I felt lighter. Then one evening, there was another knock at my door. This time, it was small hands. My granddaughter ran into my arms and held me tightly. "Grandma," she whispered, "I missed you." That hug healed something deep inside me, something I hadn't known how to name. Love, I realized, doesn't always come from the places we expect. Sometimes it arrives softly, reminding us we still matter. Months later, Daniel sent a message. "I hope you're doing well." I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "I am. I truly am." And it was the truth. I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't need revenge. What I needed was self-respect. I learned that giving endlessly without boundaries does not create love, it creates dependency. I learned that silence can be stronger than shouting, and I learned that choosing yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. Now, when I look at my reflection, I don't see a forgotten mother. I see a woman who finally stood up gently, quietly, and firmly. And that is my victory. Not loud, not dramatic, peaceful. If this story felt familiar, if you've ever loved someone quietly, given without being seen, or learned the hard way that boundaries are necessary, you're not alone. Sometimes the hardest lesson isn't letting go of others. It's learning how to hold yourself with the same care you gave so freely. If you're still listening, thank you for sharing this moment with me. And if you'd like to hear more stories about love, loss, and finding peace later in life, you're always welcome here. Take care of yourself. And remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's how healing begins.